Every billionaire has one, the one name they'd say if you asked. Let's count down to the pairing that closes the loop entirely. Number 10. Mark Cuban. Cuban has said openly, on multiple occasions, that the billionaire he respects most is Warren Buffett, specifically for Buffett's discipline around not chasing every trend that comes through the market. Cuban has said he keeps a mental image of Buffett calmly sitting in Omaha, completely uninterested in whatever is currently hyped, and uses it as a kind of gut check whenever he feels tempted to jump into something flashy, whether that's a new tech craze or a deal he's being pitched on his own show. The two aren't close personally. Cuban has said they've really only crossed paths a handful of times at investor events, but he still credits Buffett's public letters and interviews as something he's genuinely studied for years, describing them at one point as more useful to him than most of the business school material he ever encountered, which is a strange kind of admiration considering how different their public personalities actually are. Number 9. Michael Dell. Dell has cited Buffett as well, though for a very different reason than Cuban did. Dell has said what he studies most isn't Buffett's stock picks, it's how Buffett structured Berkshire Hathaway itself, a company built specifically to let him move money freely between businesses without ever needing to answer to short-term market pressure. Dell has said he tried to build a similar kind of patient, long-term ownership structure once he took his own company private, walking away from the constant pressure of quarterly earnings calls specifically because he'd watched how much freedom that structure gave Buffett for decades. Number 8. Sara Blakely. Blakely has repeatedly named Oprah Winfrey as the billionaire whose path meant the most to her, not for business strategy specifically, but for the fact that Oprah built an empire almost entirely around trusting her own instincts in an industry that constantly told her no. Blakely has said she kept a specific Oprah quote taped inside her old day planner for years while she was still selling fax machines door to door, long before Spanx existed, and that seeing another self-made woman succeed on her own terms made the idea of starting a company from nothing feel slightly less impossible. The two eventually did meet once Blakely had built Spanx into a real business, and by her account, Oprah remembered the quote. Number 7. Peter Thiel. Thiel has pointed to Mark Zuckerberg as the billionaire whose early instincts impressed him more than almost anyone else he's backed. Thiel was the very first outside investor in Facebook, writing a check for $500,000 in 2004, when the site was still just a dorm room project with no real business model, and joined the board shortly after. Thiel has said what convinced him wasn't the product itself, it was watching a 20-year-old Zuckerberg calmly turn down a 9-figure acquisition offer from a much larger company, betting everything on his own read of where the internet was headed. Thiel has since called that decision one of the clearest signs of founder conviction he's ever personally witnessed. Number 6. Larry Ellison. Ellison has named Steve Jobs as the billionaire he admired most, and the two were close personal friends for over 25 years, dating back to before either company became a household name, meeting through mutual friends in the tech world long before either of them had built anything close to the empires they'd eventually run. Ellison has said Jobs was one of the only people he ever fully trusted with financial advice, and at one particularly low point for Apple in the 1990s, Ellison seriously explored personally buying enough shares to take the company private just to help his friend regain control of it, an offer Jobs ultimately turned down, reportedly telling Ellison he wanted to earn his way back in on his own terms instead. The two vacationed together, argued constantly about business strategy, and Ellison has said publicly that losing Jobs in 2011 felt less like losing a business contact and more like losing a brother, a level of closeness that's rare anywhere on this list. Number 5. Elon Musk. Musk's favorite billionaire, at least in his early career, wasn't a business icon at all in the traditional sense, it was Larry Page, someone Musk has described as one of his closest friends for over 2 decades. The two reportedly stayed at each other's houses in the early days, before either company took off, and Page was one of the few people who quietly supported some of Musk's riskiest early bets, including reportedly being willing to personally help fund Tesla during one of its lowest points if it had truly come down to it. Musk has said what he respects most about Page isn't the wealth at all, it's that Page was willing to bet everything on ideas that sounded borderline insane at the time, which, considering Musk's own track record, is clearly a trait he found deeply relatable. Number 4. Jack Ma. Ma has cited Bill Gates specifically as the billionaire who shaped how he thinks about wealth once you already have more than you could ever spend. After building Alibaba into one of the largest companies in the world, Ma has said conversations with Gates about the Giving Pledge, an agreement where the ultra-wealthy commit to giving away the majority of their fortune, genuinely changed how he thought about the back half of his career. Ma signed on and has since said publicly that money past a certain point stops being interesting to hold on to, a philosophy he's directly credited to watching how Gates approached the same problem years earlier. Number 3. Mark Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg has said his biggest influence among his billionaire peers is also Bill Gates, though for a completely different reason than Ma's. Zuckerberg has pointed to Gates's shift from running Microsoft full-time to running a global health and education foundation as the exact model he wants to eventually follow himself. The two have reportedly had multiple private dinners over the years specifically about philanthropy strategy, with Zuckerberg asking detailed questions about what Gates would do differently if he were starting his foundation today. It's a strange kind of admiration, one tech billionaire studying another tech billionaire's retirement plan decades in advance. Number 2. Jeff Bezos. Bezos has repeatedly named Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, as the billionaire whose business philosophy shaped Amazon more than anyone else's, despite Walton having passed away years before Amazon even existed. Bezos has said he personally studied Walton's entire approach to relentless low prices and obsessive customer focus while building Amazon's early strategy, treating Walton's old interviews, memos, and his autobiography almost like a business textbook he returned to repeatedly. He's even said that Amazon's early leadership meetings would occasionally reference specific Walton stories about walking store aisles himself just to see what customers were actually experiencing, a habit Bezos apparently tried to copy in Amazon's early warehouses, reportedly showing up unannounced to watch how packages actually moved through the building rather than trusting the reports on his desk. Number 1. Bill Gates. There is no other answer on this list that closes the loop quite as perfectly as this one. Gates's favorite billionaire is Warren Buffett, and the two became genuine, close personal friends, an origin story that's almost too perfect. Gates met Buffett in 1991 at a dinner his mother had arranged, one Gates initially tried to skip entirely, assuming a stock investor from Nebraska would have nothing interesting to say to a young tech founder who, at the time, thought he had exactly 1 hour to spare before getting back to work. Within an hour of actually talking to him, Gates has said his entire plan for the evening changed, and the two ended up talking for hours, eventually staying so late that other guests at the dinner had long since gone home. What followed was one of the most famous friendships in modern business history. The two traveled together, played bridge together for years, and Gates has repeatedly named Buffett as the single person outside his own family who most shaped how he thinks about money, patience, and long-term decision-making. But here's where it actually loops back around. When Buffett himself has been asked, in interviews spanning over 2 decades, which billionaire he admires most, he consistently names Bill Gates, specifically citing Gates's shift into full-time philanthropy as something he considers more impressive than anything either of them ever did in business. In 2006, Buffett made it official in the most direct way possible, pledging the overwhelming majority of his own fortune, tens of billions of dollars, not to his own foundation, but directly into the Gates Foundation, betting that Gates could put the money to better use than he could himself. In the end, the two men who each independently built some of the largest fortunes in modern history, through completely different industries, completely different personalities, and completely different decades, ended up naming each other, unprompted, as their answer to the exact same question, closing a loop that started with a dinner neither of them particularly wanted to attend.